this is core 7. It's a piece of granite. It's been cored from a piece of granite, and it is one of the cornerstones of the argument for Lost Ancient High Technology. The argument being it cannot be replicated with primitive technology. They go as far as to say it can't be replicated with modern technology. The issue of cores is one of the cornerstones of the entire Lost Ancient High Technology argument, and core 7 is the gold standard in that the features in core 7 go explain all the other so-called impossible to do cores in granite and basalt, etc. And there are really three main issues presented in that, and that is that the core is tapered, and that it's narrow at one end and broader at the other. The second issue is the striations, or the grooves in the core, and the third is minerals. So we can deal with all of these issues, and the first issue is tapering. This will be a longer video, especially for something so simple as explaining tapering, but it's necessary because in comment sections and myself and others just keep getting thrown this particular core and that it's impossible to do, it's impossible to cut, and all of these issues. So let's just go through and end this. Now, I'm not picking on just some sort of random people on the internet. I'm people who charge quite large sums of money to take people on tours and to point at stones and say impossible, impossible, cover up, suppression. The mainstream is ignoring it. And so you can see their posters and the charge for their 12 to 14 day courses. So it's tours. It's not cheap in comparison to other tours, and they make multiple definitive statements, including some accusations against the mainstream, as it's called. So amongst the entire Lost Ancient High Technology industry, and that's what it is an industry at this point, because it's not just for books, not just for videos, it's tours such as these. But a common thread running throughout them is the works of Christopher Dunn. He's regularly quoted as an authority. His work is presented as the proof of the issue. And so, again, not just targeting random people, but they're charging money for this. So links will be all in the description, but this is the Geyser Power website, the official Christopher Dunn website. That particular page is based on one of his chapters from the book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. And again, the argument, it's impossible, therefore it has to be some lost technology. Here are some quotes. So recent, the Ancient Egyptian Tube Drills, Part 1 by Uncharted X. So within the first minute of the introduction, I want to tell you a story about one of these mysteries, about one of the verifiable signs of advanced technology that must have existed in the distant past. This specific mystery has been investigated and debated for 150 years. It's been studied by pioneering explorers and gentlemen scholars, by mainstream Egyptologists and archaeologists, and it's clearly been investigated by independent researchers, the so-called alternative history authors of our modern era. Despite all of this investigation, despite all our modern capabilities and our extreme capacity for understanding, we are still left with something we simply cannot explain from within our current version of history. Nor is this something we could replicate even accurately today. The ancient mystery is a clear indication of advanced technology, a type that is unknown to us, and it has a signature that is currently beyond our capabilities, which is what makes this story so astonishing. In this video, I will show the proof behind these claims. This is the story and the controversy of the mysterious tube drills from the ancient period, Old Kingdom period of ancient Egypt. This is what they're talking about. So there's an image from Petrie, and there we have core 7 itself, and I'll just put those lines in to show the clear tapering. So another interesting signature of this tube drill process is the fact that the holes in the cores themselves are actually not straight. The top of the cores taper slightly inwards to the deeper the core is cut. Now, some of you might be looking at these examples and thinking to yourself, well, there's no mystery here, Ben. This has all been solved. There was a TV show, a PBS special that had Egyptologist Mark Lerner, and they showed how all this was done in that special. They used copper saws, they used copper tubes, they poured sand and water into the hole, and then they just proved how these holes were made. The reply, well, in return to that, I would say yes, I do know all about this documentary. And although the experiment itself was really commendable, we should always try to be learning more about these topics through experiments like these. I'm going to pause. Well, indeed you should, and experiments have been done, and we'll be looking at this. Their conclusions really don't have anything to do with the evidence that's available to go and look at that's in the archaeological record. Over the course of this video, I will show how the methods shown in the PBS special have been debunked multiple times in relation to the markings we see today on drill cores and drill holes, and that the conclusions were reached in this special and the paper trail that exists behind are demonstrably wrong. Okay, so we have multiple definitive statements. The striations and minerals are mentioned, but again, the tapering is one of the issues, and we'll just deal with that because that's the first, one to be dealt with. This is you can find this video on YouTube, Granite Cutting and Drilling. It shows the pieces of drilling and cutting in granite, and apparently this has been debunked multiple times, but let's examine it now. Right off the bat, in the ancient Egyptian tube drills video, he freeze frames on the core that's taken out, and it is actually tapered. So that's it's right there to begin with, but we'll go further now. Uncharted X, and again all these other Lost Ancient Technology people going on tours, they promote very strongly the works of Christopher Dunn as an authority. Well, this is an image from his own page. Christopher Dunn says that the tapering is, how was this done? Can't be done with modern technology, can't be done with primitive technology, and he proposes, originally it was sonic drilling, and now he's proposing that it had to have been done with something like a thermic lance. And there we have an example of what would be the tapering. First of all, to that, granite is especially susceptible to thermic shock. If even you just take a piece of granite and put it on a campfire, not very long afterwards, the heat will cause the granite to fracture and to become permanently brittle. So these grooves would not exist. So a thermic lance just doesn't cut it. It doesn't work because, well, fire setting as it's called. I posted a video a while back showing examples of fire setting. The granite becomes damaged even with just fire. So I show using fire, heat it up just with a campfire, throw water on it, and it breaks the granite. And examples in here you'll see where people just use fire alone and to destroy, essentially ruin, permanently break the granite. So using a thermic lance, as Chris Dunn describes, even bringing it close to its melting point is way over the threshold of this permanently turning the granite brittle. So that no, it cannot be a thermic lance. Just the properties of granite. So advocates Lost High Technology, they lead tours, claim granite and basalt cores such as these are clear, if not undeniable, evidence, or sometimes even proof of LAHT, that's just Lost Ancient High Technology. They claim the tapering these cores are impossible with primitive techniques and modern technologies cannot replicate them. Well, I, myself, and everyone else who's conducted experiments before me, multiple independent experiments, all say that this tapering is the inevitable result of primitive tools and techniques. But tapering is the evidence of primitive hand-operated tools, and we'll examine that and clear evidence for it. Multiple experiments in bow drills, flywheel drills. These are drills known to, they exist in the archaeological record. We know that ancient Egyptians used these, not just in the Middle and later kingdoms, but even way back to the very early dynastic period as well. So again, these are multiple independent experiments. I'll link all these videos in the description. But anyway, the result, we see core 7. That's the ancient one. these are all examples of different modern cores. Every experiment in drilling granite with primitive hand-operated copper tools deliver the same result, and that result is a clear, evident tapering of the core. It's the very essence of good science. Multiple, independent, repeatable experiments delivering the same result. It's a fact. And I've got to say, Lost Ancient High Technology Laboratories, crickets. Given the money, given the time invested, I think one of the most curious things about Lost Ancient High Technology is the distinct lack of any investigation. Some of their claims, for instance, using Mohs scale, are just demonstrably wrong, cringe wrong, but also, the supposed passion for exploring this history, yet the complete lack of any investigation. A lot of stone pointing and saying impossible. Everything that they've said impossible, I've been replicating, and it literally can be done, and it can be done in a short time, and they're very easy, very cheap experiments to do. So it's just curious why, for all this energy into Lost Ancient High Technology, why there has been zero energy into experimentation. They might refer to Christopher Dunn's experiment listed on his page on Core 7. We will investigate this. This needs to be investigated, and it's a very curious feature. So there's a written description, there's a photo of the drill, and there's a photo of the result. But now, for instance, a 2.12 inch diameter core, the tube itself, here's the end result. He gives we'll go through these again later, gives the results of, and there is the core, which does not have actually the taper is 1 millimeter, and that's very curious. We'll examine that. We can use that image. So now we have a 10.62 inches across, just by lining up a bunch of those tubes. He describes the the weight to be a 60 pound or 27.215 kilo weight. You know the diameter, and well, you just bring up a plate, lifting plates for weightlifting. Gives you the weight, the diameters, and the thickness of those plates. This is not a 27 kilo plate, it's a 5 kilo weight. 25 kilo weight would look something like this in comparison, and it would be actually much thicker than that too. This is no small, so that's actually how the drill should look if the photo matched the description. It might seem as a small point, but it's actually a very important one for more than one reason. The weight itself, as well as the diameter, will affect the way that the hand-operated tool will work. We'll examine that later, and this is very important because this apparently debunks the Dennis Stock's drill, which you can see one example. He has many others as well, but this is the one that they focus on, so let's look at that one. In his work, Stoneworking in Ancient Egypt, he uses a method like this, where he cuts out a groove to begin the drill. When you begin the drilling process, if you don't have a groove or a wooden guide or something to keep the drill in place to begin with, it's going to be slipping and sliding all over the place. So that's a necessary feature. Now that's an actual image of the groove, which was chiseled out to prepare the drill from that video. And now let's look at Dennis Stock's video. Here we see the groove created by Dennis Stocks to begin the guide of the drilling process. Here we can see them in the process of drilling, and from the diameter of the tube and the length of the rope, we can work out that we're looking at approximately 50 RPM, maybe 45 to 50 from there. Now, another important feature, notice the tube itself, it's moving side to side, it's wobbling around the axis. This is another feature that will lead to the inevitable tapering of the core. Also, they show, like this is, for instance, as I'll show later from the tomb of Rek Mire. Now they also show them drilling harder, not just wood, but harder objects. But you also note as it's drilling down, the size of the hole is larger than the tube which is drilling. So we'll get a glimpse of that in a moment where we get a close-up. and you can see the hole is larger, the tube itself is smaller. This is inevitable to achieve a tapering of the core. Now they're going to use steel chisels to pop out this core, as I've shown. I've used just copper and wood to pop it out. You do not need steel to do this. Should not be a problem at all. There we see the core, and I'll freeze frame it there, and there we can see the inevitable the tapering of the core, which is an inevitable result of the wobbling of the drill, and also by beginning with a guide chiseling out a groove to begin with, has Christopher Dunn did. So a top heavy drill, this type of groove to begin with, will inevitably lead to a tapered core. It's just science. So this is from the Geezer Power website, official Christopher Dunn website, where he shows his top heavy hand operated drill, which allegedly created a core of 1 millimeter tapering from top to bottom. But as he describes, after chiseling a shallow groove around the marked circle using a carbide tipped drill point. So just like the one by Dennis Stocks shown here, or other examples, any groove will chiseled out groove such as this to guide the drill that's necessary to stop the drill from slipping over the granite. You could also use a wooden guide, but I'm not sure exactly what type of drill point he used, but it doesn't really matter like what the actual tool was. The inevitable result of using a groove such as this will ultimately lead to visible taper. So there I've just zoomed in, and you can see the edges there, so we get an idea of the type of the groove being cut. And so whether it's Dennis Stocks or Christopher Dunn, we have a cross section where, if you're using this tool, and especially if you're not a very, very highly skilled mason using a good tool, the cross section will be something like this, where the groove, and we'll need to compare that. So that's his tube. He gives the copper tube the inside and outside diameter, therefore the walls of that tube, the thickness, is 1.585 millimeters, or 0.0625 inches. Even a larger diameter pipe such as that, copper tubes have a very narrow thickness to the copper, and so if you're inserting that into any sort of groove, whether it's this larger one with flint by Dennis Stocks, or the one shown in the granite and cutting drilling video, or we only see the end result of Christopher Dunn's alleged experiment, but again we can see that it's not a very precisely cut groove. What's ultimately going to happen is that the copper tube will not perfectly fit into this groove. It's only 1.585 millimeters thick in that case, and so just like with Dennis Stocks' experiment, the tube doesn't fit precisely in there. There's the operation. As he's drilling further down, we see the noticeable gap between the tube and the core itself, and it's, as you can see, it's and then we lead to a tapered core. Now the reason for that is, and it's just unavoidable, is that cutting a groove such as this means that the copper pipe tube is just not going to sit in there very well. And also we have the lateral movement of, so whether you're using a bow drill or a flywheel drill, we'll show later, there's a bias to it. So as they move the drill back and forth, it's pulling the tube side to side as well. That's another important factor. But the key point is that using this method, we end up with a tapered core. It is inevitable, because that thin tube is just not going to sit perfectly inside that groove. And also the effects of abrasive, we'll look at that in a moment. So the tube is going to move side to side. So for instance, there's a tube, and that would be an idea of a movement within those grooves. That's even if theoretically you could keep the drill perfectly straight and not have that lateral movement, the drill will still slip around inside that core, and as you drill further down, you will have a significant, a visible tapering of the core. That's just using a hand operated tool such as that, and beginning the core with a groove such as that. That is just inevitable. And there we have the freeze frame. It's even even if you could keep the tube perfectly vertical and stop it from wobbling around the axis, which you cannot with a top-heavy drill, but even if you could eliminate those factors just by using that groove to start off with, it'll inevitably lead to a tapering of the core. It is evidence of primitive hand tools. It is certainly not evidence of lost ancient high technology. Multiple independent experiments, different whether it's a bow drill or a flywheel drill. And you notice that Chris Dunn's drill is, again, it's essentially the same as a flywheel drill. It's only the operation, how you rotate it. Top heavy, crank hand, off-center handle. These are just one of the features. Now, top heavy, operated by hand, you cannot keep it perfectly vertical without a frame. So as we saw in the video with Dennis Stocks, he cannot keep that drill perfectly straight and vertical. It wobbles around the axis, and which invariably will lead to a taper. Same with a flywheel drill. And Chris Dunn's, which he moved to and fro, has even more problems in that respect. And so, very curious. So, tapering is just beginning with a groove such as that is inevitable. If you just extend the lines out, you can see how closely it's already starting to resemble Core 7. Again, you see, so that tapered core. And of course, there's a lot more examples I'll show in a moment. So, whether you use a bow drill or a flywheel drill, both of them depicted in ancient Egypt, known to be used. So this is, for instance, the tomb of Rekhmire. It comes from the later period, or is it Middle Kingdom, the Valley of the Kings. But there's a few important. So the tomb itself has many photos from casting of metal, how they made a vise for their timber and metal work. It sort of covers the whole range of all of their different tools, in which it's a very, very important feature. Now, they show the bow drill being used for wood, and one of the things amongst the lost high technology, oh, well, that's only being used on wood. But also in the tomb of Rekhmire, you see them drilling, and notice he's got 3 drills at one time. So they're actually drilling beads, which are very hard on Mohs scale for jewelry, and it's also a good picture because it shows that, you know, they had a little bit of think, you know, they could improve, you know, just with, you know, they're not stupid, that they had ideas on how to improve their efficiency. So if you're using a bow drill, you can actually put 2 or 3 or even more drills in there. So using a bow drill, you could drill 2, 3, 4 or even more holes at one time, again with a very simple wooden frame or just a couple of people to keep them guided. And that goes to the efficiency. Now, also in Tomb of Rekhmire, they also show stone vase hollowing out, and they show the processes. So it's basically a workshop, multiple people working at one time, not just one person, you know, making the tools and doing every level of it. There's just a photo of Dennis Stocks showing it, that in operation. I'll try to remember to link the description. There's a Dennis Stocks lecture as well, where he does some demonstrations in front. But again, we see them drilling the beads for the jewelry, and we can see the final result there. So workshop. There are some examples of that type of jewelry, and you'll see these very fine beads. So if you can drill a very fine bead, drilling a larger core is just, you know, that much easier, because drilling fine holes is more difficult. You have to be much more precise with those types of operations. And so they're using faience, the glass, that ancient Egyptian glass is included in these type of, now, faience. So again, Mohs hardness scale, I'll put a link in the earlier video where these lost ancient high technology people keep referring to Mohs hardness scale when they're talking about hammers and chisels and stone pounders. It is just like really badly wrong to use that. This Mohs hardness scale has 0 to do with that. It's only appropriate for drilling or for cutting. It has to do with abrasives, not with impact. But on that scale, so granite, basalt, diorite, andesite, all of these, you know, schist, all these other stones, it's the quartz in there that gives them their hardness. So they're only ever going to be as hard as the hardest mineral. Stone is not a granite or basalt, is many different types of particles that have been cemented together. And so the quartz being the hardest, that defines the hardness of the granite. Now, most of the granite is not quartz, it's just the quartz in there that defines that. So it's those minerals that give it the hardness. Now you have turquoise, but the Egyptian faience glass, which included crushed quartz in there. So you have your normal glass plate, 5.5 on Mohs scale, which is equivalent to soft steel, as where Egyptian faience on Mohs hardness scale is, to a more hardened, more high carbon steel, 6.5. So Egyptian glass is equal to steel nails in terms of Mohs hardness, and you certainly wouldn't impact a steel nail with glass. So that's Egyptian faience glass is very hard on Mohs hardness scale, but you're not going to be making a hammer or a chisel out of it. It's good for grinding. It's not good for hammering and pounding. I'll put the link to that description because it's quite incredible, the alleged science basis used by the Lost Ancient High Technology community. It is like way off, cringe level. Now, bow drills, flywheel drill, and that used by Christopher Dunn. The bow drill, certainly, it's a common across ancient cultures, even before civilization, whether it was for making a fire. Bow drill's pretty basic. We also have, these are just some pictures, because we actually have depictions of the craft shop, the workshop where they're making the vases. But the important point is the flywheel drill and the handle and even the operation of how these things are being done. Again, that's in the Valley of the Kings, a later period, but even going way back before to the very, very early dynastic period at least, we also have these drills being depicted. And the important part is that so you can attach any type of, once you understand the principle, you can use that drill, whether it's for drilling a core or whether it's for hollowing out a vase. Now this type of drill head is the perfect one for hollowing out vases. You can also find it in Gardner's sign list, which is pretty much 101 ancient Egypt in regards to that. And in the section agriculture, crafts and professions, where they list the tools stoneworkers drill with those types of for hollowing out the vases, but also it's a detachable. Having conducted many of my own experiments, now I've gotten used to my particular type of drill, the weight and the shape of the handle. I've gotten used to it. I don't want to change it. And so just like a carpenter, even though he's got an old hammer, he's been using it for years. He likes it. He knows the weight. He knows the feel of it. You could give him a brand new, really expensive hammer, but he would prefer to use his old tool because he's used to it. And that's what I found by drilling as well. I tried to change my drill, but actually I liked it. It was set up, and so I change the diameter. I keep the drill, I keep the weight, I keep the handle. I just change the end part, the drill bit part to it. So whether I'm using a drill bit that's good for hollowing out or one that's for drilling a tube, that's why I think that these pictures, and there's better ones than that, but where they attach different handles, different drills bits or drill ends to their handles. It's worth bringing this one up at the same time because think, but you're only showing small diameter drills. This is the evidence for Ancient High Technology Part 1 machining by Uncharted X. Many incredible statements of fact made in there, but let's look at one example. At the other end of the scale, some of these tube drill diameters seem almost impossibly large, certainly way too large to be done by hand. I don't I think anyone who's ever sort of worked and has some basic problem solving skills would be thinking, well, why? You just increase the size of a diameter. Why is these too large to be done by hand? I could understand if it was 6 feet or 12 feet, but these are, I don't know exact dimensions, but 1 foot, like, big deal, really. Now I'll link this paper, Principles of Tubular Free Abrasive Drilling. There they show the photos. I'll also show you the video. These experiments were the Scientists Against Smith channel or the Alexander Sokolov channel. All they do is they get a large log and they wrap a copper sheet around it. They build a very simple frame with a very simple handle, and they have absolutely no problem drilling larger diameter cores. It is very basic problem solving. I'll link this video, drilling granite with a large copper pipe, and it's just, I don't know, simple. I don't know how they would think that it's certainly way too large to be done by hand. It's actually very easy. I'll also link this video, just a preview, but I just used pieces of copper and timber to knock out the core. So that then the argument will be, well, how did they drill down so hard? so deep, sorry, even though they have only a shallow. Well, you could make it longer, but even with a very shallow piece such as that, you only have to drill down a short distance and you use a piece of copper and a wooden wedge and you knock out that core, you drill down more, you knock out the core. It is really no problem at all. And we'll have a look at that piece of video, but it is really a really simple problem to overcome. Very basic problem solving. I really don't understand it. This is the drilling granite with a large copper pipe experiment from the Alexander Sokolov channel, which they also run the Scientists Against Smith channel. They show how it is actually incredibly easy to do this, so you don't even need to cast a large copper tube. So whether it's a small diameter or a large diameter, you really just need a wooden shaft and you just wrap a copper sheet around the shaft. It's very, very simple, very easy, really no problem sort of solving 101. Having made their frame to make it easier to do the operation, it's just wood and rope really. Here they use a wooden frame to instead of the chiseled chiseled groove approach, they use the wooden guide approach. In this example, the abrasive they are using is corundum or emery, very well known across the ancient world. So it's not even a modern abrasive; it's a very ancient abrasive, and it's just a matter of wood turning a handle and some rope and a simple copper sheet, and away you go. So you have a large diameter core there. It is, again, to say that these large diameter cores are way too large to be done by hand, I don't understand it. Now they also use the wet method rather than the dry method. Dennis Stocks, Christopher Dunn use the dry method. That results in different striations. We'll get to that in future episodes. But there we see they've cut through. You can see the lines and the sun shining through there. You can just now pop out the core. Large diameter core with a copper pipe. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. So returning to the issue of the tapering of these cores, again it's just a fact that if you chisel out a groove such as that, the very thin walls of that copper tube, the drill, will not fit perfectly in there. They will be sliding around. The abrasive is not self-aware to know to drill straight down. It will also be drilling at the sides of a wall. So this is the first reason, unavoidable reason, especially using this chiseled out groove method, to get a taper in any granite core or any stone being drilled with this method at all. The second reason that tapering is unavoidable using primitive techniques, and that tapering is actually a signature of simple hand tools primitive techniques, is the fact that any top heavy drill, whether it's a bow drill or a flywheel drill, as those seen and recorded in ancient Egyptian texts and wall paintings, is the fact that you cannot keep this drill perfectly straight. It will wobble, it will rotate around the axis as you're spinning it. That action is the second undeniable, unavoidable reason for tapering. So even if you had a perfect channel groove to begin with, the fact that the laws of physics and biology are just going to dictate, because people are not machines where they can keep things perfectly straight, and that will inevitably, invariably and unavoidably result in tapering of your of any drilling operation. Doesn't matter whether it's wood or stone or even metal for that matter. It's just an unavoidable fact. Here again we see the Dennis Stocks experiment. Pay attention to the drill and that action, how he cannot keep it straight. The drill is wobbling around the rotational axis. Unavoidable, will result in a taper. Here we see an example from the video Making Egyptian Drill Holes, Lost Ancient High Technology from the Alexander Sokolov channel, and you can see how the drill, being hand operated and top heavy, is simply going to wobble and move around, which will inevitably and unavoidably create a taper. It is evidence of primitive technology and ancient tools. Just to get a better view of it, because the camera moves around, here's an example of me operating that same type of drill. I'm just using a sit-down version. Even though after this I did improve my technique slightly, so later cores were less tapered, but you can see again, it's just a rule of science and of biology that keeping this perfectly straight is essentially impossible. And this will inevitably and unavoidably result in a taper. Again, using the tapering of a core is the proof of primitive technology. primitive techniques. It's the exact opposite of the case promoted by the Lost Ancient High Technology community. Multiple independent repeatable experiments have proven this. There is a distinct or complete lack of experimentation in that regards when it comes to Lost Ancient High Technology. So alone or combined, the factor of using a chiseled out groove to begin the drill in granite, or again any stone, will inevitably lead to a tapered core. Secondly, whether it's a bow drill or a flywheel drill, the fact that they're top heavy hand operated tools will inevitably lead to a taper. These factors, these drills, are the evidence of the primitive technique, primitive tools being the cause for tapering. They are absolute proof that modern technology is, or some lost ancient technology, is not the cause of these tapering. Multiple independent experiments, you can conduct these at home very cheaply, very easily, and again a distinct lack of any experimentation on behalf of a Lost Ancient High Technology industry / community. A lot of stone pointing, saying it's impossible, therefore it is entirely wrong. And again, they really need to do some experiments rather than present these false narrative in regards to this. But of course, when that happens, their whole industry will collapse, because the whole basis of that industry is impossible, therefore some unknown Lost Ancient High Technology. But again, very simple, cheap experimentation shows it. Even they use the evidence of the tapering of the core and actually show that in there, and it's evidently tapered in there, and use that Dennis Stock's video as some sort of proof of their claims. Quite remarkable. So is, again, Core 7, the tapering and other features of Core 7 relate direct, except for large diameter cores, which we showed again, very easy to do. We see the very small diameter cores even depicted in Tomb of Rekhmire and found on that jewelry. Not one part of this is evidence of anything except for a lack of knowledge of basic tool working principles, a lack of evidence of experimentation by those who promote this. And it is an industry at this point. Again, these people are going on tours and publishing books and saying these things. It's not just some picking on random people saying wacko things on the internet. You know, they have a responsibility, and and an error only becomes a mistake once you refuse to correct it. That these channels will delete, hide, block this type of information also speaks volumes in regards to that. I've had it done to myself. Many other people have had the same experience. They're not rude comments. They look, well, what about this? Here's a link, and then the comments get hidden or deleted. So it's not sort of adding some political, some offensive sense. It's not these type of comments. And again, that's a very interesting feature, and all of these channels know about this at this point, and yet they refuse to address it. So is the tapered core, Core 7, or any of the other tapering evidence of lost high technology? No, it's the opposite of that. So we just flip that around. So that would be the top of a core, and there's a broken piece, so it gives a better example. It's a tapered core. This is one of the images from the works of famous Egyptologist Matthew Flinders Petrie, and we see, for instance, his illustration of Core 7. Now the striations and the minerals, will deal with that in the next episode, but first the issue of tapering is just like way off. There you also see, so again, the tapered core, exactly the same. Multiple independent repeatable experiments have produced these taperings. It's not an issue. Using this method to begin the core, or again just a top heavy hand operated drill, inevitable to get a tapering. There we see an example from the Egyptian drill holes video. Note the striations will come to these, but again, tapering just like that, that's what you get there. So it's not just a Dennis Stocks one. All of their granite cores are tapered. I've linked this paper in the description, Principles of Tubular Free Abrasive Drilling. All of their cores are visibly tapered, and you also see this tapering here. Multiple independent experiments using these primitive techniques. It's just done. It's absolutely a fact. Let's deal with it. These are a collection, some of the cores that I've created, and again, if experiment is repeated, get the same result, then that's a proven theory. If one person gets an opposite result, well, then you need to question their experiment. There's one person who's done a single experiment, alleged experiment, and he did not get a visible noticeable taper. We'll examine that because he, Christopher Dunn, being the godfather of ancient technology, presented as an authority on the subject. So let's compare these cores of mine with tapered with core 7. I can go get past that. We've seen the flywheel drill example, so here's one of my cores. Again, you can see it's clearly visibly tapered. Compare that to core 7, overlay it on the top. There's a transparency, basically perfectly matches essentially. That was black granite, grey granite. I've done multiple grey, red, black granite with different abrasives as well to replicate different striation patterns. That'll be in the future because this striations and helical spiral is just like the tapering. It's so way off, it's actually cringe. But every single core that I've done using primitive techniques, these are in marble. I've also done one in limestone. The majority of them were in granite, but we're getting the same results where they're either identical or have that same taper very closely matching. So it's just a fact, this tapering argument is dead. There's a partially drilled core I just used crushed white quartz, those white pebbles you probably see in gardens. Quartz is the same as sand, so again, Brian Foster literally says you cannot drill in granite without anything next to diamond level technology. It's just cringe, it's insane, and it gets promoted and repeated over and over again. The number of comments is just, crazy, and it's even more weird is the fact that you'll often see, I'm an engineer, I'm a stonemason, I work in manufacturing, and they do these massive comments with all of this, like, I know I work in the field, and it all sounds very technical. They know what they're talking about, yet they consistently get it so wrong. You point this out to them, and then you'll see them repeat, copy paste that exact same claim. You cannot cut andesite with copper, you cannot drill granite with copper, etc. I have to say it's almost like a troll farm in the way that this is operating. I think they're getting a bit desperate at the moment because they know that their narrative, their industry is in serious hot water. But grey granite, just using quartz, notice that this core is tapered, and it's also there's a bias on it, and through multiple experiments and the mistakes that I made and the learning curve I went through, I know what I'm talking about now. I can demonstrate it. I'd be willing to do it on any live stream if anyone wants to take the challenge in the Lost Ancient High Technology community. I don't believe they will. But anyway, the challenge is out there. We can do it on a live stream. We can demonstrate these things in real time. You can repeat them at home. So flywheel drill, copper tube, and just quartz, so sand essentially, and you can also see the beginnings of the taper, just like in this one. So yeah, beginning with that, Chris Dunn drill, we'll have to examine that separately because there's a big hole. Now, this method of drilling, of chiseling out the groove, is not the only method. I think my favoured method is the one that I replicated. I replicated the drill and I replicated this. Again, if you can repeat the experiment, it's true. They used a wooden guide hole. So this core, it's tapered, but it's also has a bias. That was my early technique. I had so later cores now are perfect circles at the top, and they're even on either side. It was just a matter of rotating your position when you're drilling. There will always be a bias, whether it's a bow drill or a flywheel drill in there, and you can just, again, it's just by experimentation, and I've learnt that you just need to rotate your position regularly and you can equalize the bias out. But also this bias taught me a lot about the striation patterns as well. We'll get to that, but with this one I reused the guide hole, and the guide by that time had been worn out by the action. The copper tube and the sand, the abrasive, will wear out the guide hole. You'll notice it's larger, it doesn't fit very well. That's why there is a more extreme taper. By using a tight fitting guide hole and using a new one each time so it doesn't get worn out, we get very, very neat cores, but the tapering is unavoidable. So even with a wooden guide hole, the tapering cannot be avoided. The tapering is proof of primitive techniques, not the other way around. And as an example, say, the loose fitting guide hole, notice the gap between, that's not a good thing for many reasons. Firstly, because a lot more material is being removed, which means that your drilling speed is quite slow. By improving my technique and my method, making a tidier guide hole, notice that there's much less material being removed. So it's not only faster, it's also much neater. Probably don't see it in this photo, but there's a slight ellipse pattern in this. It's not a perfect circle at the top, as where by the improved technique and rotating the drill, I get perfect circles and very neat tapers. So it's faster and it's neater, and you can only learn this through experimentation and experience, which the Lost Ancient High Technology industry has zero interest in doing. So whatever your method, whether it's a guide, so this loose guide hole would be very similar to using this groove, where you have, again, an unavoidable taper, but even with a tight fitting guide, it's still going to be there. It's just the laws of physics and biology insist upon it. Okay, it's also worth noting there's a third reason for the tapering, and this is how the drill begins in the beginning. You have these nice 90-degree corners, but the abrasive is wearing down on the drill as the copper, or steel, or bone, or even plastic. I've done an experiment using a PVC pipe and crushed sandstone to drill into granite. Absolutely it can be done. Those who say it cannot be done simply do not know what they're talking about. Experimentation just proves it. But what you have here, so the abrasive itself, the quartz, is getting all the corundum, but whatever the abrasive is, it gets embedded into the side of the copper tube, the pipe. A weakness of copper is its flexibility, its malleability, which actually is a strength in terms of drilling. So the abrasive gets embedded into the copper, basically forms a protective sheet around the outside, and that's what stops the copper wearing down anywhere near as fast as what the granite or basalt is being worn down. So this is a cross section. That's how your pipe tube begins originally, and the more you drill, it sharpens. It's basically what happens is that the walls of the copper are being ground down and creating something of a taper. That's the third reason for tapering. So here you see an illustration of that, where you have the abrasive. The further down your drill, it's going to grind away at the sides of the copper and sharpen that up. This tapering, again, is unavoidable with copper, but it will be in relation to the thickness of the pipe. So my pipe was 1.2 millimeters, the thickness of the wall. The Christopher Dunn experiment, now his copper tube, as he gives his own figures, was 1.585 millimeters. Very standard for, if you've ever seen a copper pipe, they very rarely have thick walls. It's just, between 1 to 2 millimeters is pretty much a standard thickness of there, and so that tapering of the tube will be in relation to the original thickness of the copper in itself. So that taper will only come to fractions of a millimeter or fractions of 2 millimeters, depending on the type of tube that you're using. So think of this copper tube, this drill, as sandpaper. It's not the paper that cuts, it's the sand. Aluminium oxide paper, that's an ancient abrasive available to the Egyptians, to the Greeks, and to other people even in India as well. Corundum is aluminium oxide. It's basically the same material that they use. It makes rubies and sapphires, but unlike rubies and sapphires, corundum is widespread and is even mentioned, and the evidence of it has even been found inside tube drills such as at Karnak, at Amarna, where even copper residue was found in there. So again, the archaeological evidence of copper and this particular type of abrasive does go back quite some time. In diamond core tools, or tools such as this, so it's not the steel. They say, well, they didn't have steel, or high quality steel. Well, it doesn't really matter, because it's not the copper that does the cutting, it's not the sand that does the cutting, it's not the steel that does the cutting, it's the abrasive. And that diamond or tungsten carbide or silicon carbide is very high on Mohs scale, makes it a great abrasive. So it's not the steel, it's not the paper, it's not the copper, it's the sand that does the cutting, whether it's diamond, silicon carbide, tungsten carbide, or aluminium oxide. These are just facts, well established facts. So the third cause of tapering, which would be not evident to the naked eye, is the fact that the abrasive will work down on the copper as you drill down. But again, the copper, if you drill down an inch, you won't into granite. You'll only you'll only wear a fraction of that copper away. We'll examine that further on. And also might be noted that you don't lose the copper. The copper then becomes part of the slurry, and then you can recycle and reuse that copper. But that's not relevant for now. But this tapering will only result in a fraction of a millimeter in relation, depends on the thickness of your copper tube. So it's simply just the fact that a top-heavy hand-operated drill without a guide will result in a visibly tapered core. Even if you're using a wooden guide or even with a stone guide, it's just the facts of biology and physics, because the tube will still wobble. Even the guide will be worn away by that same action because you're using that abrasive as well. And so it's just simply unavoidable. Tapered cores are the evidence, I would dare say the proof of primitive techniques, and there is no proof of any advanced technology at all, and the signature's said to be it's impossible, therefore lost high ancient technology. Well, you don't have a leg to stand on in this point, and we'll begin with tapering, but the striations and also the way the minerals and the way that abrasion works, and the how different minerals either will fracture or they will cleave, and that'll come back down to the argument of quartz, feldspar, and mica. Very easy to tackle as well, but that'll be up next. So, using a top-heavy hand-operated drill, well, you can avoid that by using a machine such as this, where it's locked in, very precisely made, and there will still be some, because the drill's still going to sort of wobble around. That'll depend on the RPM. But even if you get the most modern, perfect machine and you attach a steel or a copper tube to it, and you use a free abrasive, so you're just putting in dust, whether it's corundum or silicon carbide or quartz, whatever it is, it'll wear away at that tool. And so even with a modern tool such as this, you'll still get a tapering, and that tapering will be in relation to the thickness of the copper tube that you're using, which will mean a fraction of a millimeter. So copper tube attached to a machine such as this will get a taper of a millimeter precisely, approximately, again, depending on the thickness of your tube. So whether you're using 1.22 mils or 1.5875 mils, such as in the case of the Christopher Dunn experiment. So taper, unavoidable evidence of primitive technology. Advanced technology would not have that tapering, because they would overcome the issues in regards to using a top-heavy hand-operated tool. All experiments in primitive techniques known to be used to get the same result, whether it's a bow drill or a flywheel drill, you get a taper. I've done it myself. Everyone gets this result multiple independent repeated times, except for one person, and that's the drill experiment described by Christopher Dunn in his book on ancient technologies in ancient Egypt. He gives the diameter of the core, diameter at the top, 44.914 centimeters, diameter at the bottom, 5.019 centimeters. So a taper, the top is 1 millimeter, 0.05 mils, thinner than the bottom of the core, or a taper of 0.5 mil on each side, which matches a machine to do that. Now, you might say, well, no, his technique, well, we'll examine that, but let's look firstly at what he says himself. So somehow, using his top-heavy hand-operated drill, he was able to, and using a groove to begin the drilling process, he was somehow able to overcome that, somehow. Top-heavy hand-operated drill, operated by a human being, you just can't keep it straight. Yet somehow Christopher Dunn was able to overcome this and not get a visible taper just like everyone else. So the argument would be, well, maybe he has Shaolin Zen level skills. Well, as he describes himself, as I worked the tube deeper into the granite, I consciously wobbled it more than I needed to. I consciously wobbled it. So that's how he's describing it. Now, how in heaven's name, even with firstly, even if the issue would be if you're operating this drill, and we'll get to the rotation speed of it because he doesn't say how long it takes, but compared to other experiments, and you can work out their rotation speed, which is the main factor in the drilling speed, it would take him a very, very long time. He makes no mention of that. But he does say I consciously wobbled it. And you would have to get, if you're consciously wobbling it, you have to get a taper. There's no other way around this. And that's why I have to say I simply don't believe this experiment was conducted as is. I believe it was done with a machine, because those results, and again, multiple independent experiments, just the laws of biology and physics just dictate that this must be the case. His results differ from everyone else's multiple independent experiments, and it just defies logic, it defies reason. And we'll go more into this because there are so many red flags in regards to that experiment, and this is the experiment that the Lost Ancient High Technology community, charging people for books, charging people for expensive tours, all rely on. And we'll get into the Serapeum as well. So, I don't know how. I don't know how. And I've experimented with this type of drill setup. We'll go into that later because I've filmed it's just top heavy drill. No, you cannot avoid that. And we'll look at the RPM, so his rotational speed as well, which has to do with how long it would take. And as he describes it, and it would take anywhere working 8 hours a day. It would take approximately 7 days if you're being very rough and fast and you're trying to do the maximum speed. If you want to keep it very straight, and again, he says he consciously, so even this doesn't matter. The RPM in this as well is another feature, and the fact that he doesn't say how long it takes, but for all those, given everyone else's my own, and the results that come from this, I smell the strong stench of bovine excrement. So tapered cores are not evidence of ancient lost high technology. They are quite the opposite. It's logic, physics, multiple experiments all get the same results. This is finished, case closed in this regards. Everyone who's done it, everyone who's shown their experiments, you just cannot avoid this. The issue of a thermic lance in itself, just the basic properties of granite being so susceptible to thermic shock would eliminate this, given the fact that those striations are still there and those grooves are on there. So this definitely did not happen. There is no lost ancient high technology evidence in regards to that tapering. And again, Christopher Dunn, heavily promoted. He's relied upon his feature. Later this year, he's going to be on a tour, and I'm sure because these tours and their videos, you know what they're going to say. The whole basis of it is it's impossible with primitive technology, therefore ancient lost high technology. It's impossible. Point at a stone. It can't be done with copper. Absolutely it can. You can drill, you can cut with copper. Even with steel, you would have no advantage because modern cutting technology still rely on either diamond or an abrasive to work. It's not the steel that cuts, it's not the copper that cuts, it's not the paper that cuts, it's the sand that does that. And so there's, for hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars generated, you'll see that these people feature prominently and often in Ancient Aliens as well, saying it's impossible technology. No experimentation has been done, and if it has, I know why it hasn't been promoted, because it would just absolutely destroy the argument that these industries rely upon. They are charging people large amounts of money, they are publishing books, they are stating these things as objective facts. They're the exact opposite of that. It is a fact-free zone, and that's why, charge money, now you're open to it. Now, I don't know what the fine print is this? If is the fine print say this is for entertainment purposes only? If they say it's for educational purposes, well, you're charging money for something, and they know these things. They know about these other experiments. They know that you can cut and create giant circular saw marks with copper. They know all of this, and yet it's missing from there. So this industry is one built on, at the very best, most charitable way to describe it is gross incompetence. And there is another explanation for it, and I think the dollar signs give it there, and the fact that they won't address these issues, keep just again point at stones. It's impossible. It's impossible. How do they know? Have they done the experiments? How do they know? Where does this information come from? It doesn't really matter. The information that they're giving, that they rely upon, is wrong. This is an industry built on ignorance or profit at any cost. So there you go. Granite cores. So core 7 being the gold standard of this foundation stone of evidence for lost high technology, the main arguments being the tapering, the striations, or those groove, and the minerals and the way that they've been cut. We'll deal with those next, but when it comes to tapering of cores is the evidence for primitive drilling techniques. Repeatable, independent, multiple experiments have all clearly proven this. You can test this for yourself. Again, I'll be happy to go on and demonstrate this on a live stream if that's what's necessary, if I want to stick by this tapering claim. The tapering is the evidence for primitive techniques. The tapering is the evidence that it was not advanced ancient lost high technology. This is proven multiple independent times over and over again in all sorts of different stones, all sorts of different abrasives. Tapering, evidence for lost ancient high technology, no. Evidence for the opposite, case closed, finished, done with it. And so let's move on to the next ones, and that will be striations and the minerals. And once that's done, there is this whole issue of the cores, which is so important to the lost ancient high technology industry, is over and done with. And just like we've seen with these tapering, multiple independent experiments have shown that these other arguments are baseless. There is no evidence for it. It's an industry built on nothing. And let's go and striations, minerals coming up next. Yeah, what's more to say about that? So it's just finished, and the experiments, the evidence by the lost ancient high technology community in regards to striation minerals is the same as their tapering, and it is very, not to say very weak, is actually being a kindness in that regard. So tapering, finished, done. It is the signature of primitive drilling techniques. Case closed.